And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this is 10 cards you should be putting in your Commander decks. Episode 55. We are starting out this week with Reparations. 1 white and a blue enchantment. Whenever an opponent casts a spell that targets you or a creature you control, you may draw a card. Not too shabby. The card, I think, is appropriately named, right? Typically, the spells that your opponents are casting that are targeting your stuff is going to be removal, and when they remove it, you get basically a replacement for it, right? You get to draw a card, so you're not losing any value. I've thrown this card in a couple of decks. In particular, if you suspect that your opponents will be targeting your stuff, it can be good. Maybe an enchantment tribal deck, because it is an enchantment, and it would be really easy to slot this in there. Coming in at number 2 this week, Renegades Getaway. 2 and a black instant. Target permanent gains indestructible until end of turn. Create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token. So I've mentioned this card a few times before on my channel. I've put it in a ton of decks. It's not that old of a card, but it is very unique in what it's doing. It is a black spell that makes a permanent indestructible. That's the kind of thing you don't see much in that color. Protecting creatures, I think black has gotten quite a bit better at. They never used to be nearly as good at it. This is protecting a permanent, though. How many cards can you get in black that are going to be able to protect your enchantments or maybe your artifacts? Also, that added bonus of a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token can also be pretty good, right? If you're in a black sacrifice theme, now you get to protect the permanent that is about to get destroyed, and also you get that little token on top of it, which you can use for a sack fodder or something like that. So pretty great card. I think that could slot into a lot of decks. Coming in at number 3 is Reprocess. 2 black sorcery. Sacrifice any number of artifacts, creatures, and or lands. Draw a card for each permanent sacrifice this way. So speaking of that sacrifice theme, this is one of my favorites. Has been for a long time when it comes to any sort of sacrifice theme. It can go in the typical I sack my creature aristocrats type of theme, but also it can go in a land sacrifice if you're in black there. It can go in an artifact sacrifice theme. So if you got a deck that's cranking out lots of artifact tokens maybe, and there has been a few of those recently, this could be a really great fit there to get some value off of those artifacts. Coming in at number 4 is Requiem Angel. 5 and a white angel. 5/5 with flying. Whenever another non-spirit creature you control dies, create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. So this card has been printed in a commander set. I think it's relatively well known, but the reason I'm bringing this card up is because specifically in commander, this card does a lot. It is a non-spirit creature token, which means, first of all, if you can change the creature type of your creatures, this goes infinite, right? So if you have something like a conspiracy, change all your creature types to rats or something. Now the spirit tokens that you are making will not be spirits, they will be rats, and you can go infinite, obviously, because everyone you sack, you replace. However, this card's also really great in any sacrifice theme. Again, this is just a coincidence that I'm doing 3 sacrifice themed cards in a row, but a lot of those themes like to sacrifice tokens, and a lot of the effects that you get are if a non-token creature dies, and this doesn't care about non-token. This only cares about the creature type. So now if you're sacrificing those zombie tokens or those rat tokens or whatever, you can replace them with spirit tokens. But just in general, I think in almost any deck, if you just have, your board gets wiped, all your creatures get replaced by 1/1 spirits is not bad value. So this really is a card that could go in almost any deck, I think. Coming in at number 5, and this is an interesting one that I don't know if it fits in any particular deck or any particular theme, but I always just thought it was a really neat card, and I never see it in commander games. Retaliator Griffin. 1 red, green, and a white. Griffin 2/2 with flying. Whenever a source an opponent controls deals damage to you, you may put that many +1/+1 counters on Retaliator Griffin. I think that's pretty darn good in a commander game. Your opponent swings at you with a 5/5, you just let them connect, and then you put 5 counters on your Retaliator Griffin, so you now have a 7/7 flyer. That seems really good. I mean, it's even source. So if your opponent has a Perforos deck, every time they hit you for 2 damage with your Perforos, you're going to be putting 2 counters on this guy. He's going to get massive. By the time it gets around to your next turn, you'll be able to one-shot them. If you're in a Naya life gain deck, it might be really good, right? Because the damage you're taking, you are offsetting it with the life you're gaining. Maybe a Jared Carthalion deck? Could it be a good fit there? I mean, you're doing the same sort of +1/+1 counter theme, making a really big creature. It's not exactly the same sort of strategy, but I think it does fit. It's one of those cards that I just don't know if it particularly fits in any deck, but you could probably put it in any deck and it would do a whole lot of work for you. I think it would probably deter your opponents from wanting to hit you, right? Coming in at number 6 is Retether, 3 and a white sorcery. Return each aura card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Only creatures can be enchanted this way. So this is a card that I definitely have seen in Commander. I think quite a few people are aware of it, but I think quite a few people are also not aware of it. It is an old card, can sometimes be forgotten about if you're in that theme. I actually checked on EDH Rec. It is not in nearly as many decks as I think it should be, because there are lots and lots of commanders out there that want to be doing auras. We just got Light Paws from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty that this card absolutely has to go in. It is really unique in what it's doing, right? It is essentially a replenish, but for auras. I mean, there's no big secret here. It just goes in any aura deck in white. It just is a fantastic fit. So if you didn't know it existed, there it is. Coming in at number 7, Retribution of the Meek. 2 and a white sorcery. Destroy all creatures with power 4 or greater. They can't be regenerated. Simple as that. One of my favorite board wipes, for a very long time. I've put this in a lot of decks as well. It's only 3 mana, right? And a lot of people out there, they want that cheap board wipe. This is a great option for that. And also, of course, it's only going to hit the big creatures. And a lot of white decks tend to be leaning towards the smaller power. There are lots of board wipes in the format already that do similar things. This is one that maybe people don't know exists. It is one that I think is probably the best option. Only 3 mana, and you're destroying all creatures with power 4 or greater. A lot of those effects do power 3 or greater, and sometimes that can be too low of a bar to sneak under because maybe your commander is a 3 power. I like 4 power better because it's really only going to hit those bigger creatures. So really fantastic board wipe if you're looking for something in that sphere. Coming in at number 8 is Reverence, 2 white enchantment. Creatures with power 2 or less can't attack you. So again, talking about that sphere, but now we're in the opposite sort of scenario where you're sort of going in the other direction and you're hating on the small creatures in white, which you don't see very often actually in white. Just a really sort of odd, unique pillow fort type of effect. I suppose you don't really care about the small creatures typically, but creatures with power 2 or less just can't attack you at all. There's no option here to pay mana or anything like that. They just can't attack you. So against certain decks, I suppose this is a card that I don't know if I would necessarily throw in any deck, but in certain pods, maybe if your buddies like to play those goblin tribal decks, even zombie tribal decks, because zombies a lot can be 2 power or less, this can be just great, right? They're going to swarm you with their huge team and they just won't be able to attack at all. And if you're against that mono red goblin deck or that Dimir zombie deck, it's probably going to be really tough for them to get this off the battlefield, right? Because they don't deal with enchantments very well. So a lot of times, even though this card doesn't look like much, could completely shut down some decks. Coming in at number 9, we have Restore, 1 and a green sorcery. Put target land card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. And this is a card that was actually printed in a Commander set. It was printed in Commander 2013. I never see it ever. And I think it's a very interesting, unique card, right? Obviously, the first thing you think is, well, put target land card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So obviously you can steal your opponent's lands, right? Which is pretty neat. You do not see stuff like that in green. Obviously it's a land theme, so that you do see in green, but just putting stuff from your opponent's graveyard into play under your control is not something you see in green ever. In particular, if you can destroy lands, you can destroy your opponent's Cabal Coffers and then have it for yourself or their Gaia's Cradle or whatever. Also, though, I think this is just a really good ramp card, actually. It's 2 mana, just like a Rampant Growth or a Farseek or anything like that. And if you're in a deck where you have lots of fetch lands, lots of, Evolving Wilds, stuff like that, you can use those on turn 1 or 2, and then on turn 2, you can use this to put them directly back into play, right? So, I mean, it's really a lot better than a Rampant Growth that way. If you are guaranteed to have a land in your graveyard, probably a fetch land, at least early in the game, it will be a fetch land. Now on turn 2, instead of I Rampant Growth and get a basic land and put it into play, I cast this and I put that Misty Rainforest from my graveyard directly back into play, which of course is a lot better. It's not going to be tapped. This is just coming into play under your control. Also, it's a fetch land, so now I can go get a breeding pool or whatever with it. So just if you're in that scenario, I know it's a little bit niche, so I'm not saying it's better than a Rampant Growth, but in that scenario where I plan on having lots of fetches in my deck, I think it's really good, and a lot of people will play off-color fetches because they want lots of lands going to their graveyard or sacrifice effects or whatever, so I think it could be a great fit there, and this card never sees any play, and I think it should see at least a little bit more. And coming in at number 10 is another interesting ramp card. Retraced Image, 1 blue mana sorcery. Reveal a card in your hand. then put that card onto the battlefield if it has the same name as a permanent. So a lot of people look at this card and go, okay, same name things don't work very well in Commander. And yes, that is true. There is some decks where this will definitely fit though, right? Obviously, if you're in that spy kit deck that I talked about in my last 10 deck ideas video, if you have that spy kit on one of your creatures, you can just pay 1 blue and put any creature from your hand, I guess non-legendary creature from your hand, directly into play, which is fantastic. I'm sure there's a couple other little shenanigans you can get into here, but I referred to this as a ramp card, and a lot of people are probably wondering why. Well, because this is not non-land, right? This is reveal a card in your hand and put it onto the battlefield, and if it has the same name as a permanent, which includes basic lands, right? And basic lands are the one thing that we can have the same name in this format. So if I'm in a mono blue deck and I play an island turn 1, probably I have another island in my opening hand and I can cast this and then put that island directly into play. I've now ramped on turn 1. In fact, that's better than any other color can do. In fact, it's a little fringe, but it is. Or if my opponent does as well, right? If my opponent is playing the same colors as me, now I don't need to have it myself because it's the same name as a permanent on the battlefield controlled by anyone. So it actually could be a really neat ramp card that way. It's one of those cards really that I think you probably could try out. I'm sure people will comment below how they've used this card to great effect. You know, you could throw it in a deck and see how it works for you. It might work out great, might not work out so well. You never know with some of these things. Give it a try, see if it works for you. But that is it for today. That is 10 more cards you should be putting in your Commander decks. And if you are thinking of purchasing any of these cards, I have a TCG Player link. It is in the description below. Give it a click. It helps support the channel. But that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.